We make decisions every day. What to wear, what to eat, which route to take. But then come the big ones. Where should I go to college? Should I change careers? Move? Get married? Retire? While small choices shape our daily lives, big decisions can feel like a shot in the dark, even after praying or seeking advice. How do we know we're making the right call? In this episode, Hope, Sara, and Jessica explore wisdom and discernment in decision-making with insights from a 16th century priest. We'll unpack practical ways to navigate life's crossroads with confidence. Welcome back to episode 3. We are in season 6 of the Inspired Podcast, and today I'm joined by Hope and Sara.
Hey.
Hi. How are you girls?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Good
Go
to
ahead
be
and
here.
introduce yourself. Both of you have been around here.
Yes.
So let's hear a little bit about yourself.
Okay. I'm Sara. I am happy to be back on the Inspired Podcast today. I attend here at X Church and have been involved with the Inspired team and conference in lots of different ways. I'm a mom. I have 3 little girls. My stage of life is kind of past the baby phase, which is nice. That's where I'm at right now. But yeah, I'm happy to be around the table, and I love these conversations and love you guys. So
Nice.
Hi, I'm Hope. Like Sara, I have been kind of in the inspired world in a number of different ways over the past years. I actually was on staff here at X Church, so that was really fun. I'm in a different season of life now. I'm doing marketing and special events for a nonprofit dental facility, so that's really fun. Very different. Not a dental girl, but hey, I'm learning about that.
Smile, though.
Thank you. Thank you. I am engaged. I'm about to be married in 3 months, which is crazy. 94 days. Yeah, it's coming fast. So, but I'm also very excited to be here. I love getting just to kind of feel like we're in a living room with women who are listening. So I'm excited for the conversation today.
Yeah. Well, we'll hop right in because there's lots to really unpack. This episode, we're going to be talking about big decisions and little ones. Okay. So we were kind of talking before this podcast and realized that life is just made up of a bunch of decisions, whether they're small or big. But even though we might find ourselves having to make big decisions every once in a while, like with career changes or moves or where to go to college or who to marry or who to date, there also are several little decisions that make up a lot of the core of our life. And what we find is if we exercise the discernment muscle of making decisions on the everyday, on the regular, then those big decisions become a little less scary and a little less hard. So what we're really talking about today is discernment. And discernment is really just a fancy way of just saying that we're asking that God would be with us as we discern some of it, and we kind of unpack some of the inner movements that are happening within us, and that we're being in touch with our inner selves as we make decisions throughout the day. So that's a really fancy term, but it really just means being good at using wisdom and experience to make a decision. So we're going to be unpacking that today. But first of all, we kind of want to get you guys to know us a little bit and where we're coming from with some of these decisions. And so I'll go first. I remember one of the most plaguing decisions for me was whether I was going to marry my now husband. We dated for 7 years, and I grew up in the church, and I desired to do this the right way. I desired to have the right kind of marriage. I desired to do God's way, but there's not really a clear answer in the Bible when Jessica Castle should get married. Right. And that's what I wanted. I wanted to be able to flip open the pages of the Bible and for God's word to say, you can marry Trey. And that just wasn't the case, but that's what I really wanted. And so I was left to try to come up with the decision outside of that. And I didn't really know what to do. And so today we're going to be talking about kind of in hindsight, what I wish I would have done. And in hindsight, what I feel like I did okay. And so I'll kind of be talking about that throughout this podcast, but why don't you girls chime in with some of your decisions that you've made and how you kind of filter through those?
Yeah, I think we were also talking a little bit about how life can either feel like, oh, I haven't really had to make a ton of huge decisions, or it's like, that's all I've had to do, it feels like. And I think for me, I'm more on the that's all I've had to do just from college, going to college and then taking a job and then taking another job and then moving back home and all the things. So I feel like honestly one of the biggest decisions I've had to make most recently is moving back here. This is sort of my hometown, and a job presented itself here at X Church, and it felt kind of crazy to make a big move like that because I had just made a career move like 2 years before that. And I was living in Nashville at the time, and like it was my dream. Like I was literally living my dream. Like loved everyone I was working with, loved all the community I'd found. And so I really felt like God was putting this in front of me, like, hey, it's your decision to make, but I'll make a way. Like this is the path. And discerning that was really difficult for me because it would have meant leaving a ton of what made me happy. And so I think there are kind of two things with discernment. Like you think, oh, well, if it's the thing that makes you unhappy, then it's the thing that you should do. Yeah. But like, that's not always the case. Like God wants us to be happy. So I think that's honestly what I struggled with is like, okay, I feel like God is laying this out and it's pretty clear that this is what I should do, but I'm not the happiest about it.
Well, and like especially in the church world, we're told a lot, and even scripture says it, like to deny yourself, take up your cross and follow me.
Yeah.
And the person that we follow, who's Jesus, lived a sacrificial life. Right. And even did death on a cross. Yeah. And like, I'm pretty sure that wasn't like his idea of like, this is the funnest thing ever. Right. Yeah. Yeah. He did it because he had great love, but at the same time, there's probably parts of that call that were not fun. And so I think sometimes as Christians, we can think, well, the most undesirable, nasty, like bummer of a scenario is what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah. Which now looking back, I'm like, I know that God was not going to just call me to something that I was going to be miserable in. Like, but at the time it felt like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to have friends and blah, blah, blah. And I'm so glad that I made the decision to come back, but it just didn't look desirable. Like moving back to my hometown did not feel like the best thing to do. But now, like I have grown so much, I've learned so much. I now am getting married. Like there's so many things that if God would have wrote those out for me at the beginning, I wouldn't have even thought twice.
Yeah, you had no idea it was on the other side.
Yeah, I had no idea. And so I think like even if you're listening and you're like, okay, but you don't know like this situation of mine, like but also you don't know, like only God knows what's on the other side of that. And if I would have known, then I probably would have been like, yes, I'm on my way, you know, like I'll leave tomorrow instead of being like, let me take a couple months to think about it, you know. So I think that's probably like the biggest decision for me most recently.
And I feel like for me, my experience is less with big life-changing decisions. Not that I haven't made any. I'm married, have 3 kids.
Those took some decisions.
Went to college, I've made those decisions, and we'll touch on this, I think, as we continue talking. But those decisions were kind of more, on one hand, they were more like no doubt about it type of things. But on the other hand, I wasn't as... I've followed Jesus, quote unquote, followed Jesus my whole life. I've loved Jesus my whole life. I haven't necessarily followed him my whole life. But where was I going with that?
You have a different route to decisions.
So I haven't always taken his input into consideration with those decisions in the past. Yeah. And a lot of those decisions I made a lot of years ago, like almost, 10, 15, whatever, college, marriage, and kids now. My youngest is 3. So it's been, it's been a journey of me getting to where I'm at now, where I care so much more about what God has for me, what he has to say about my desires and what his input is. So while I've loved him all along, I haven't really respected or cared about that input as much. So on one hand, it was like, of course I want to marry Joe. Like, I love Joe. He loves me. Like, and there's no doubt about it in my mind still that he's for me and I'm for him. Yeah. But that was just an easier decision for me. Yeah. Now I haven't had to make really those huge types of choices in a while. And so I kind of experience decisions and having to utilize discernment more on a day-to-day basis with smaller choices, interactions, things like that, more on like a relational level.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Yeah. Well, I mean, who to do life with, right? Because you're raising kids and you have to make so many decisions that don't have to deal with relationships. But there's probably a lot of aspect of raising kids where you start helping them make good decisions about who to be with, how to make a good friend, how to be a good friend, who to hang out with, how it makes you feel after you do hang out with them, all this stuff. Because so much of young motherhood is helping others navigate. And I think at the same time, we end up learning a lot along the way.
Yes, for sure. And as I make those small choices and, in and out throughout the day, for my kids or with my husband, how to parent, how to navigate our family, how to lead our family, how we want to present ourselves as a family, what are our core values, those types of things.
Those are big decisions.
Yeah, they are for sure. They're just more few and far between, I feel like. And the more I make them, the more I can trust that part of me that is making the decision.
Well, they happen incrementally. So you're not... Very rarely do we sit down and make these core values about this is how we want to raise our kids. It really just happens on the go, and it ends up actually being an overflow of what's in you, and the discernment that comes along with it is, like you said, that you haven't always followed Jesus. You've always loved Jesus, but you haven't always followed him, and so the more that you trust him and follow him, the more you probably have a good sense of the right and wrong and discerning the Holy Spirit and his direction in you. Yeah. That's good.
That's so good.
So let's start with maybe a few steps to take before making a decision. And this one sounds very obvious, but listen to us kind of unpack it. Before making a decision, pray for discernment. Pray for the Holy Spirit to guide you as you make a decision. I cannot tell you how many times I skip this step. Because what I do logically is I need to solve this problem, and I go straight to the brain power. How do I make this work? What do I need to do? How much money do I need to make? How do I need to find a sitter? How all of these things we're faced with every day to be very logical. And I think, to be honest, we've probably learned to use our brains more than our hearts, because there's also this level of fearfulness of where our heart is going to guide us. And so I think so many times we do jump into the front seat real quick and just say, I just need to make a logical decision. But before making maybe in the context of a big decision, pray for discernment. So what does that look like for you as you do that, and also you relationally?
I think for me, and again, I'm speaking out of the most recent big decision that I've had to make, but for me, it was actually really cool. I was in 21 days of prayer and fasting at the church that I was at, and so I kind of had that default, I'm already praying about a ton of things, so let me pray about this too. But that has not been the case for other big decisions. Like you said, the first thing I think about is well, where would I move? Where would I live? What's the apartment that I would move into? And
what part of town?
Yeah. And because I think we are quick to be well, let me figure out the logistics. But it's hold on, pump the brakes. Is this even what God has for me? Because the reality is there's going to be a lot of things that come your way in life, good and bad. And if we don't exercise the discernment muscle and know to pump the brakes and ask for God to be in it before we make the decision, we could make a lot of decisions that maybe didn't align with God. And so for me, thankfully, I was in 21 days of prayer and fasting, and that is kind of what I leaned more towards. But I think for me, I always forget that we have just this simple line of communication with the Lord.
Yeah, that's very true.
It doesn't have to be this okay, so I have this decision, let me get it all tailored before I bring it to him. It can be right after someone sends you a text and says, hey, have you ever thought about moving back here? You just say whoa, God, that was huge. And I don't know how I feel about that. But can you be in the midst of every single conversation that I have about this? Can you be in the midst of every thought process that I have about this? Even down to the logistics that I want to jump to. God, can you be in every single detail of this? We have that at our every second when we're driving. We don't have to stop and pull over. We don't have to journal it. We literally can just talk openly how I would to you. oh my gosh, guess what? Someone just sent me a text about this. Like, that's how we can talk to God about it. And so I think remembering that, like, it doesn't have to be this tailored thing that you're like, whew, okay, God, I'm going to bring this to you. It's like, no,
Here's
simple.
the plan. Here's the outline.
Yeah.
I need you to
It can just be
respond.
simple. It can be
That's
as
true.
simple as that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think for me, one prayer that I pray, whether I'm in the midst of trying to make a choice or figure out what's going on with, my relationship with this person or what that interaction was about because it felt weird or whatever it might be, something I try to pray all along is that God will help my desires to line up more
that's so
closely
good.
with what his desires are for me.
So good.
And as I've seen him really answer that prayer and do that for me, discerning those small things like has become more of a second nature. And of course, there's times where I'm like, I haven't felt uncomfortable in a while, or like, that things aren't, I'm not having to really second guess. I don't feel like I'm being challenged. And those are definitely red flags for me where I'm like, I'm probably walking and just doing whatever I want to do and like following my own voice versus like following God's voice.
Yeah.
And so I'm grateful for those times because that's when I can check myself and say, maybe I kind of got a little too far away from you for a minute and started walking on my own, but bring me back close to you and help me kind of keep my eye on where you want me focused.
Yeah.
And that makes those little decisions a lot more almost easy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think for me too, and I might be jumping ahead, but I feel like I've always been taught to follow where your peace is. And so asking for peace, like when you're praying about making either a day-to-day decision, a relational decision, or a big decision, praying for peace in the right direction. Like, I know we already hit on it, but it doesn't have to feel like the hardest thing in the world. Like if it's from the Lord, you'll feel peace.
Yeah.
Even
if it's hard.
Even if it doesn't feel like what you want, you'll feel peace. And like, I felt so much peace, overwhelmingly a number of peace. And I think that it was because I asked him for that.
Yeah.
Like,
well, I remember the very first time that like we moved from Texas to Ohio. I was in the same boat. I was so that was like my worst fear, like moving away from family because I had little kids and I was like, I am not going to survive. I do not know a soul up there. And then we came to visit. My husband interviewed for a job, and that was the first time I can remember feeling that I knew what the answer was, but I also had a peace about it. Like, this is going to be really hard and uncomfortable for a little bit, but I can't not because that I feel the peace of the Lord just in this situation, in this decision. And so, like you said, you will notice it. If you pray for it and ask for it, and you find you'll find yourself in situations where you're like, that's going to be really hard, but I can do it. I can do it with God's strength, and I know He's asking me to step in that direction.
Yeah, it's like a weight off your shoulders. That's all that peace is for me. Like, I just feel, you can just tangibly feel God, like, walking with you. I know that sounds like lofty and spiritual, but you can. Like,
it almost feels like He's taking it from you.
Yeah.
It's like, just take this away from me because at this, like, it's no longer for me to worry about. It's no longer for me to stumble in my mind over. And I think that's really helpful for like the overthinkers of the world, like myself, because I might make a decision and still even look back and say like, I actually don't know if that was right. Although I have been feeling that peace. It's like, there's no reason for me to look back anymore. Like you brought this to my attention. Like, you helped me, decipher what's going on. You helped me almost step out of my own body, my feelings, my thoughts, like my patterns, to look at it with like clear eyes. And now I feel peace. So like, I need to remember that I can stop like, going at it. So, yes.
It's so good.
So pray for discernment, ask for peace, pray for peace, and then pray to know God's will. You touched on this. You talked about you pray that God would align your desires with His desires, and this is kind of that in that same vein. But pray to know God's will. I read this in a book one time. I think it was by Frank Viola, and it was such a good illustration of God's will because I don't know if you've ever sat in a church chair or pew and someone has said the perfect will of God. Well, I don't know about you, but that sends me spiraling because I'm like the perfect. I'm not perfect, and I will never be perfect. So how can I know the perfect will of God? And but he explained it in a way that was so I will never forget it. It's that we think sometimes God's will is a train track, and train tracks, they do not deviate. I mean, like there's very rarely that there's like a split or whatever. I mean, it is, you're either on the train tracks or you are off the train tracks, right? There's no ambiguity about, if you're on the rails or not. And so we think we're either in God's will or out of God's will. And he poses this different visual of God's will is like a parking lot. So the edges of the parking lot, I mean, like obviously a parking lot's enclosed, and the edges of the will of God are closed in by moral boundaries. So he's got a way of living, a set, guides. Don't go out here. He did this for the Israelites. He did this all throughout the Old Testament. He kind of set different rules and regulations, the 10 Commandments, all this stuff. Those are the outside of the parking lot. Inside the parking lot, there are spaces that are more advantageous than others that might be closer to the door, but nonetheless, it's still a parking lot. You can park in any spot that you want. And when I learned that, I was so freed up because I was like, oh, I'm not either in or out. I am in it, and then there are ways for me to be in different spaces within his will.
Yeah.
And
I had a pastor one time, his whole message was about God's will, and how it's very cliche sounding, but he said, if God didn't send it, he'll bend it. And his whole perspective, and I think we could take that out of context if we were not careful. His whole perspective was, if you're seeking God and you really want God to be the one reigning over your life, if you make a decision and it wasn't necessarily from him, he'll bend it for your good. And he totally will. And I think I've seen that even like with going to college. I don't feel like it was like in my best decision to do the things that I did when I first went to college. Like I kind of went a little crazy, and that was not in God's will, but I then got back on the tracks of wanting to be pursuing God, and he bent all of that for my good. And so I think it's easy to be like, well, if he didn't send it, he'll bend it, and we're just like doing our own thing. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what he was saying. He was saying, if you are pursuing God and you make a wrong, quote unquote, wrong decision, he'll bend it for your good because you're pursuing his heart and his will.
Hearts,
Yeah.
Okay, so we've done these things. We've prayed. We've asked for God's will. We've asked for peace. And then what happens? This is kind of the meat of a decision. And like we said in the intro, this rubric comes from a 16th century priest. His name is Ignatius of Loyola, and so he's an old one. So, but he's an oldie but a goodie. He's got a lot of great things to say. And let me just make a plug for a book. This book that we're basing a lot of this on is originally from him, Ignatius, but it's a newer, more modern author, and he really breaks down a lot of the practicality of it. But if you want to do any more research, go find Ignatius of Loyola and go find the book. I have to turn over to get the whole title, but it's What's Your Decision? How to Make Choices with Confidence and Clarity by Michael Sparrow. So just go ahead and look that up if you want to know more and if you want to dive deeper than we're talking about right now. But in his book, he talks about these different modes. So we've asked for clarity, we've asked for direction, we've asked for God's will, we've asked for peace. And then what do? Well, oftentimes we can go into different modes, and he explains these modes of 1, 2, or 3. And mode 1 would be like, there's no doubt about it. We hear this oftentimes in churches, like he either shuts the door or opens the door. Like I'm praying for open doors. This is very cliche Christianese, but I mean, I can just imagine, like, if you walk into a church service one time and they're just like, open door, everybody's like, where is there open door, open window? Or sometime, one time I heard a pastor say something like, well, if God doesn't open the door, you can open the window. And I'm like, geez, this is weird. Okay, but there's no doubt about it. Oftentimes in mode 1, you ask for this clarification, you ask to know his will, and it's just like, it just kind of like lands in your lap, right? There's no question about it. It's like, duh. Okay. And then there's mode 2, which is a little bit more difficult. And mode 2 is deciphering the inner movements. So this is what I kind of alluded to earlier about feelings. Like we go in logical mode. We want to use all of our logic to make decisions, but I don't think that God gave us emotions just to stifle them and not use them. So let's talk a little bit about emotions and how they play into decisions.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think they absolutely can be trusted in a lot of scenarios, especially when you are careful to question yourself and your motives and your desire and God's desires. But on the other hand, too, in the moment, they can definitely lead you astray. I think for me personally, like, I'm a big feeler. Like,
You're an Enneagram
I'm
4.
a big feeler. And it's to the point where I've noticed in my past that I'm a romanticizer. Like, I will envision everything in my head. And then when it doesn't go that way, because it normally doesn't, because I'm romanticizing it, I get disappointed. And it's like, it's definitely something that I've had to, work on and learn more about why God made me that way. And then on the other hand, too, is like, I can use it as he didn't just give it to me for nothing. Like, he didn't make me that way for nothing. So it's something that I've kind of used as a tool, but also, like, let God refine and be flexible with. But absolutely, they can, like, help you discern situations. There's gut feelings. There's, this is making me miserable kind of thing. There's all kind of tension.
Or like joy.
And,
like,
I'm
I
lacking.
feel alive when I do this.
Yes. Or that, like the lacking peace. That can be very like a stirring up of like bad feelings. And it's like, where did that peace go? What happened? Or, maybe you do make a decision on the other side, you don't feel peace. And you're like, maybe that went the wrong way there. But I think the other thing too is, while I am a big feeler, I'm also very sensitive. And so that's something that I've had to kind of hone in on too, in a lot of different ways, and just recognize, like, I am sensitive to the Spirit, and two, I'm also sensitive to get my feelings hurt really quick and easy. And that's something that I've had to work on. But I think that if you can just get to know yourself and how things speak to you and make you feel and stuff, it's something that you can use for good, because again, God gives us different gifts, and we're all different for a reason. And
That's good.
Speaking of different, as you're talking, I'm like, I think I'm on the complete opposite side. And Sarah and I are really close, so it's hilarious. Like, you can be so different and the way you process things. And I tend to, if I have a big decision to make, I kind of tap out of my emotions. And like, I'm a pretty emotional person. I'm very aware, like very emotionally aware of things, but sometimes I think I push my emotions down because I don't want them.
You don't want to be controlled by them.
Yeah. And like almost in a bad way. Actually, yes, in a bad way. Like, I'm just like, well, I'm not even going to feel. I'm not even going to allow myself to feel, because like, what if I feel a way that is going to push me to do something that I didn't want to do? And so I have had to learn how to bring those out, actually. And instead of controlling them, how you feel like you have had to, Sarah, like, I have to control them in a different way and bring them out, so that I can rely, because I do think God does give us emotions for a reason. Like, our emotions are there for a reason. If he didn't give them to us, then we wouldn't have them. But it's important to pull them out to help you feel the joy that this is supposed to bring, or whatever, or else I'm not going to feel peace. If I'm pushing my emotions so far down, I'm not going to feel peace. I'm just going to be numb, like completely numb to whatever's happening. And I do think that actually happened to me when I moved to Nashville. Like, I removed all emotions from that move because I was equally as sad about moving away from my friends. So I just decided to like tap out of my emotions. I moved to Nashville, and I went down like a crazy, destructive, anxious path, like crazy. And it's because I didn't allow myself to feel the emotions through the ups and the downs. So I think there's two sides of the coin, but I think the point is that we're trying to make is, don't be controlled by your emotions.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to sum it up. I would probably lean towards more like you hope, is I have really had to work hard. I love that. My favorite thing about this table right now in this conversation is that all of us, even though we're different, have still done lots of work. Like, and I know both of you personally, and so I can attest to like the work that you've done. And it's so important to face yourself and do the work, and it's worth it. It's 100% worth it. But just like you, I would shove. And there's some things in my childhood that like caused me to be like that. I wouldn't want to be emotional because I would be too much for people or whatever. And so I've really had to learn to pay attention to the inner movements, which are so important. But here's what inner movements do. If you break them down very simply, they either draw you to God or push you away from God.
Yep.
And those are the important things to note, because the ones that draw you to God, the feelings, the way that you feel, and listen, it doesn't always have to be the happy feelings. The despair and the sorrow and the remorse and all that can still push us toward God.
100%.
Yeah.
And so the ones, that's what we have to take note of. What are the emotions and what are the things and the movements inside of me that are pushing me to go to God about this?
Yeah.
And which ones are the ones that are kind of making me disgusted of me? And they kind of push me away because those are the things that lead me more towards myself than towards God. And I think that this feeling that leads you towards God, another way to describe that is you have a feeling of like coming home. Like, I'm operating in my normal, like, or I feel like I'm in my pajamas at home on my couch, right? The ones that lead you away from God kind of feel like you're wearing someone else's clothes. Like sometimes I'll walk away from conversations and be like,
Who was
what?
that?
What? Who was I being? And who was I trying to be? And what was I trying to do? And those do not lead me towards God. Those make me ask, God, I was wearing someone else's outfit.
Yeah.
Where, like, how do I come back, right?
Yeah.
And so when we're listening to those inner movements, they help us make decisions. Another thing that helps us make decisions is, this one kind of sounds weird, but we've talked about emotions, and sometimes we can say like emotions are bad. Don't listen to them because they're going to lead you astray. Another thing is imagination. And Sarah, I'm going to punt to you on this one because you do have an imagination, and you said like you can visualize, and like they don't always go as you want them to, maybe, or you expect. But what does it look like to lean into our imagination as we try to make decisions? Like almost putting yourself in like, okay, I'm applying for this job. I got offered this job. I can either stay in my current job or I can go to this one. What does life look like in this job? Like, can you envision yourself like on a day to work? But I think sometimes we underscore the power of imagination and what it can do for you.
Yeah. I think for me, that pairs so much with the word hope, because I have found myself being the person that will hope for the things that other people don't even consider being a possibility. And that's not a dig towards them or a pat on my back, because like I said, oftentimes I'm disappointed because I'm like, I hoped for more.
Yeah.
Like I tend to be the one that sees a broken marriage and I'm like, that can be redeemed.
Yeah.
Like I see what God could do with that.
Yeah.
And then even, the people in the marriage are like, I hate you. And they're like, I hate you too. Like, I'm done with you. And I'm like, no, like I'm going to hope for more. Like and everyone else around might be like, yeah, that's toast.
Too far gone.
I'm like, no, I can see like God can redeem everything.
Yeah.
Like he can make anything beautiful again. And so I think my imagination has been a gift to me, because I'll be that friend that'll hope for you when you're hopeless.
Yeah.
Like I'll be that friend that'll come up with deep rooted prayers that seem unimaginable for you when you don't see the other side of what could be, what's going on.
Yeah.
And
which is why your slant on this whole conversation with decisions probably had so much to do with relationships.
Yeah. Probably.
Right.
I will say too, and this has actually freed up my imagination a lot, is letting myself, and not in like a sad or like a upsetting type of way, but I have had to get to a point too where I recognize that, I mean, we all do, I'm not perfect, and like I'm not supposed to know all the things. Like I'm not supposed to be this like perfect little puppet that God crafted just right through all my experiences. Like he finally got me right and I'm good now and I shouldn't make mistakes. Like I'm a child. And so I don't have to be perfect. Like I am not perfect. I have flaws. Like I make mistakes. I have illogical thinking. There's all the things, and that has actually given me so much freedom, because it's less that I have to hold on to. Like it's less that I have to carry. And so I almost feel like my imagination gets to run more wild, knowing that like God's got me, and like he knows how he made me, and that he made me to need him. Like I'm supposed to need him. If I was good to go, all set, like had everything I needed, I would not call on him for anything.
Right, exactly.
Like I'm supposed to be the child, he's supposed to be the leader.
Yeah.
And I'm supposed to need him. So I feel like that freedom that it's almost a practice for me, is like recognizing that every day. The freedom that brings for me takes so much weight off my shoulders and allows me to be more joyful and happy and like more hopeful in like a positive way. Because like you said, you were talking about negative emotions. When I'm not feeling that, like if you're not like a super deep feeler and you're not really like that girl that's like, I'm in my feels all the time. This is going to sound so weird, but there will be time, mostly in the summer because I have seasonal problems, but the wind could go by me and it just brings tears to my eyes.
Yeah.
Or I hear the ocean, and I'm just like in awe.
Yeah.
If I go long enough and I'm not crying, I'm like, something's wrong.
You're not healthy.
Yeah. So that, like, I take both the positive feelings come for me from finding that freedom in, like, I don't have to carry it all. And I'm not. I'm broken on my own.
Yeah.
And then the negatives are kind of like, they're actually not so negative for me. They kind of help me lead myself towards staying on track.
Something that you said about hoping for other people. So I can think of a decision that we were making as a family to change jobs. And in our world, jobs are church. So like my husband we were at a church, and we have a deep desire to be rooted and like not get up and move and stuff. And our kids were getting to the age, like they were really, really young. So they weren't already in schools and all that, because it's really hard to uproot and replant. And, but we were at kind of like a crossroads about changing jobs and churches. And I do remember feeling like I had this feeling of an imagination. I can't imagine my kids growing up here, like and thriving and living full of life. And I think that in that instance, it was like I had hope for them that they couldn't articulate or see. They were too young. But as I was trying to figure out how this fit and moved and worked and, you know, kind of integrated into our life, I could think, I don't know if we're going to thrive here. So it was in my imagination. And that was actually one of the, like, my husband was feeling like that already, but he wasn't articulating any of that because he didn't know where I was on it. And I think that obviously in a marriage, it takes two to make a decision. And so once I articulated that, I just can't envision us like raising our kids here. That was the moment that he was like, I feel the same way and you feel the same way. Like we need to start making, so that in the process of decision, that was where imagination came up for us. What about you with imagination?
Yeah, I think I'm a dreamer. So when you say imagination, I'm thinking about like, okay, I like am given this potential opportunity and I dream it up. And so I can remember like dreaming about, okay, what would life look like in Canal, Winchester, Ohio? And like, although it didn't feel like maybe what I wanted to do, I did.
It ain't Nashville, I'll tell you that.
It's not Nashville. It's not. But thinking back, like, I couldn't imagine what I would have looked like as a married woman in Nashville. Like, I couldn't get myself to imagine that. And so now I'm like, wow, here I am. I'm going to be a married woman in Canal, and we don't live in Canal, but it's where our church is, and it's home. And so I think for me, like, now looking back on that big decision, I'm like, it makes so much sense. Like, I couldn't imagine this really big desire of my heart, actually. I couldn't imagine it. And I think I talked about suppressing my emotions. I had pushed that desire so far down because I couldn't imagine it in Nashville. And so now I'm thinking like, man, well, when I make another big decision, like that should be every indicator. Like if I can't imagine a big desire of my heart or something that I really feel like God's called me to do, if I can't imagine that in that next big decision, then it may not be from him or like in his will for my life. And so I think that more so challenges me more than anything, because I am a dreamer and I do like to dream up things. But if I can't get myself to dream that up, then that maybe is God speaking to me in that way.
Yeah. And then just to finish up mode 2, there's 2 more little things that happen in that mode 2. And one is discuss with someone. This cannot be understated. It doesn't have to be older, wiser person. It just needs to be a person. I mean, if you're a female, listen, I know that most females process externally. You might be an internal processor. So do the internal processing and then talk with someone, discuss it with someone that you look up to, someone that you know is just one of those deep, trusting friends. And then the next one is decide and seek confirmation of the decision. It's kind of like seals the deal, right? So like, God, I think that I know my decision. I've imagined myself here. I've imagined myself here. And I feel pulled away from you, or I feel drawn to you, and here's what I'm feeling, here's what I'm noting, here's who I've talked to, here I've sought your will, your peace, and everything, and I think I'm gonna make a decision. Talk that out with someone. Like, I decide it and say it out loud, because I think even we underestimate the power of our words sometimes. And sometimes I know for me to even just say out loud, like, this is what I'm going to do, brings so much confirmation and solidarity, I guess, to my decision.
Yeah. I would even say too, really quick to hit on the discussing and deciding simultaneously. When you're discussing with someone your decision, make it a daily discussion, because some days are going to look different than others. One day you could feel really strongly like, I think God is like really calling me to do this. And the next day your emotions could get the best of you and you could be like, nope, it's not it. That person that you're discussing with can call you out and be like, but what about this confirmation that you got from the Lord?
Right.
Like, you were sure in that moment. Your emotions are getting the best of you. Like, it's important to maybe share where you're at on like a daily, every other day, weekly, whatever the decision is.
Dialogue it out.
So that someone can call you out, because your emotions can like get in the way of making the final decision. And so I think it's just really important for it to be a ongoing discussion. One thing with deciding and like really getting confirmation, once you make the final, like, this is it, walk in it. Like, walk in it with confidence and joy. Like, once I said, like, I'm going to Columbus, I was like, I'm going. I'm ready. And like, that was me like helping prepare my heart to be ready. Like, if you there's power in words. There is power in words. It says it in the Bible. And so you have to like declare that over yourself. Like, I'm going and I'm ready. Like, I can't wait to see what God's going to do, because that will be the fuel for you too, in a good or hard decision, like whatever it is. So I think just like be really confident when you've made the final decision. One thing about confirmation, and it sounds silly, whatever, but when I decided to move here, there was one song that I had actually shown Tucker before I even was given an opportunity to move here, one of our worship leaders. And I was like, listen to this new song. It's really cool, whatever, months before. And so the Sunday that I was here to interview, I was like, I remember sitting in my car, my mom's car, because I was driving her car. And I like crossed my arms and I was like, God, if you want me to move here, they'll play that song. And like, I knew that there was no chance that song was going to be on the set list, because like, it was very new. It was just released like a couple weeks before that. I showed Tucker before it was even released. So I'm like, I'm going to outfool God. I got it. And quite literally walked in and the worship team was doing that song. And so it sounds silly and it sounds like whatever, but I think oftentimes we're like, we're going to really fool God. Like, he's not going to do that. And he's like, actually, no, I'm going to make it very plain for you. Like, very plain. And I don't think every decision is like that by any means, but I'm like, he will confirm it. Like, I had already known what I needed to do, but that was just another layer of confirmation. So it doesn't have to be plainly confirmed like that, but he will. He'll do it in his own way that speaks directly to you.
Yeah, that's good. I was going to mention too about that one friend, just I think it's good to have that person who you trust what they're putting into you, and then that they can see your blind spots, especially if it's like a super emotionally charged decision or whatever it might be, is like where you're switching up every day. That friend can say like, I can see what you can't see right now, because you're emotions are high
Yeah.
and like whatever it might be. So yeah, having someone who has your permission to give that to you when you need it.
Yeah, that's really
that's
important.
really good. Really
And then
good.
there's mode 3, and this is, so the first mode, just to recap, is like open door. It's like, this is what God wants me to do, and there's no doubt about it. Mode 2 is deciphering the inner movements of you. A lot of this plays into emotion. And the third is really just deliberating facts. Like this might, I want to hear you talk about this too, because like you said that you kind of, pull in the emotional vein. Hope and I kind of lean towards logic. But this is really just simple. It's like laying out your pros and cons. I don't know if you've ever done that for anything that you've had to make, but I'm also interested, to kind of hear how this fits into just everyday decisions too. But this is identifying the decision, what needs to be made. Okay. Like I need to do this, or I need to do this, or I need to either decide I'm going to that, or I decide I'm not going to that.
Yeah.
And then praying for inner freedom about it, because even like with some of the small decisions, there's a lot at stake sometimes, like with just where we're showing up and what circles we're in, and like what I choose family over this or friends over that or whatever. There's a lot of like little decisions that also go into this too, but this is just deliberating facts, pray for inner freedom, gather all the necessary information. Some of this might mean like doing a little bit of research, talking with people like, hey, you're in this such and such field, like how do you like it? And, what do you hate about it? And, or you work a remote job, like, what do you love? What do you hate? What are some of the really hard parts, or what are some of the perks? So just gathering all that necessary information. And then after you've gathered the information, pray for inner freedom again. Like, God, I pray that I would just be free to make either or, okay? Because I don't see a good or a bad in either one of them. It's just kind of like, give me the freedom just to say one, because I think I get so caught up like into what's the right one, right? So the inner freedom means you're praying from release of like there being a right one and a wrong one.
Yeah.
And then back to like listing advantages and disadvantages, and then test your reasoning with imagination. Here we go again. Like, imagine yourself in one scenario and imagine yourself in the other, and notice the inner movements. Am I drawn towards this one, or is there a closer connection with God in this one? And then make a tentative decision and then confirm the decision. This is, so I don't know, did any decisions come to mind when we were talking about more of like a deliberate facts kind of thing?
I think mine with that is more on a day-to-day basis.
Okay.
Like schedules, like the schedule for the week or the day. Like so today it was kind of a busy day for me. Like I had 2 work calls in the morning, and then I was podcasting now, and then I have taking dinner to a friend later, and then I have building baskets for our Inspired conference in a couple weeks at the very end of the night. And so I think for me, like looking at today and making the decision of like, can I add one more thing onto the plate? Is that a good decision or a bad decision? Should I do that? Should I not? And that's where I kind of like weigh out like, well, I could do this, but it's going to take me an hour to get here and whatever.
Yeah.
So I think that's where like the day-to-day decisions come into play for me, is like deliberating the facts. All the things that I'm doing today are good and necessary. Like I had to work, of course. And so like nothing was like, oh, that would be really bad for me or for God or whatever. But it's like, is this a good decision for like my schedule, my day?
Or like and knowing yourself. Like, am I packing my day too full to where I cannot get in touch with just, a regular rhythm or routine? I do that all the time. I like plan. I say like, oh yeah, let's get together this time, and then and then I get to that day, I'm like, oh my gosh,
I did too much.
This is back to back to back to back, and I didn't do this right, and so reframing it, like when I have to pause when someone says like, let's get together, or like, will you be at the pizza party for your son's basketball thing or whatever? And like, we might not have anything on the calendar, but I have to stop and I have to reflect on the week and be like, where has this kid been? Where has this kid been? Where has this kid been? Where has Trey been? Where have I been? And is this smart to put onto the calendar, or do we just need a breather?
Yeah. It's the same for me. And it's just something where I just have to constantly keep in mind, because a lot of the decisions that I might be, presented with are, like you said, good things.
Yes.
Things that I even like to do.
Yeah.
But I have to keep my priorities at the front of my mind. And
Ooh,
like, it kind of
priorities,
goes back
that's
to those, like for me personally, it's like those family values. Like, and you mentioned that those are types of, those kind of get formed, especially when you have young kids, on the go.
Yeah.
And it's like, we haven't done this way for this long and it's not been good for us. So we need to switch this up. And so that becomes a priority. And so that's kind of how it's been for my family. Is like, we've got these priorities that have been molded and shaped all along the way. And I need to keep those in the forefront of my mind because they're good for me. They're good for my husband. They're good for my kids. They're good for all of our relationships together. And so, yeah, like
going out with friends and
Yeah.
like allowing the freedom to do that and like touching base and making sure that the kids still feel like you're present and like all this stuff that yeah, you're completely right. Priorities.
Yeah. And like I need to hang out with my friends sometimes. And that's a good thing. But like, am I doing it so much that I haven't cooked dinner for my family at all this week because the one night that I could have, I chose to go out with my friends instead. Or like just the other night, like last night, we had a little bit of a medical situation at home yesterday and I had to skip the gym in the morning. So I was like, well, I can go tonight. And then I was looking at my calendar and like, no, I can't go tonight. It's our only night that we're all at home and I'm going to keep it that way.
Yeah.
So that's what it is for me too. It's those daily ones that are more like, this makes sense or this doesn't.
I also think, to your point about relationships, Sarah, I wanted to circle back to that. I think I really operate in this mode in a lot of ways in relationships as well, or like day-to-day interactions. Like for me, it's very easy for me to be like, okay, this person brings me a ton of joy. And like I walk away from them feeling so filled up. And this person, not so much. And so if it's like I've got this person asking me to hang out or this person asking me to hang out, it's pretty clear what I should do. Like I should definitely hang out with the person that fills me up and brings me joy. It doesn't mean that I always neglect this person because there is a place for this person too. But thinking through, okay, what did my week look like? Am I exhausted? Okay, I probably shouldn't be with the person that exhausts me even more because I'm going to have to pour into them. I don't have anything to pour into them right now. And so I think also like I kind of walk in that mode a lot of times with friendships or relationships or interactions that I'm going to have. And it's not a bad thing. Like it's not bad to evaluate those things. It's just a tool to see, okay, who brings me life and who doesn't. And it doesn't mean that I'm like, okay, cutting them out.
Yeah, only hang out with people that bring me life.
Yeah, no, not at all. Because I think there's so much purpose in both. But it's really easy to be like, okay, this is a clear decision. Like for sure.
Yeah. I feel like we could talk a whole episode on priorities.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
It's hard to figure out priorities sometimes. Okay, just as we kind of wrap up, anything else that's on your radar that you know needs to be said? Because we really covered a lot. We talked about like what do we do before we make a big decision, and how do we go about making big decisions, and how do we decipher inner movements? How do we involve and invite emotion? How do we invite logic? Anything else that's kind of forefront or pressing?
I would just say if you're faced with a decision to make, I want to really reiterate, talk to someone. I think that is honestly what has helped me get through a ton of big decisions. Someone that you know is going to be honest and say like, because it would have been easy for my best friend Haley that I lived with to be like, no, you should stay here. Like you for sure should stay here.
You help me pay my rent.
Yeah, right. Like that would be really easy for her. And like we were so close and all the things, but having someone that sees God in you
so good
and wants to see the best for you is really important. And if you feel like you don't have that person, I'm going to be praying that you do. Like if you're listening and you're like, that would be great, I would love to have that person. Like it's the cry of my heart that every person has that one person.
Start praying for them.
Yeah. So I'm going to personally be praying that whoever it is that's listening.
Life is really hard.
It is.
To live without just a sounding board and a community. I mean, we talk about it all the time around the church. Community. Find yourself community.
Yeah.
What about you?
I think too, just making sure you're not finding yourself in that like echo chamber of like all the people that you do trust around you that you're going to, or the few people or the one, you know, it's okay for those people to be different than you. It's actually good for them to be different than you.
For sure.
Like for example, like I'm so, I wouldn't say emotionally charged because I've taken it down a notch, you know, like I've got it a little bit more like under wrap, but compared to my husband, who's a lot more logical. And so when I'm thinking, like, one of our big decisions lately has been like, are we going to have any more kids?
That is a big decision.
And I'm like, that is a big decision. Took me forever to figure it out. And I'm just like, God, I need to feel it. Like, I need to like actually feel like I'm done or not. And so I think practicing patience, because it took a while for me to figure that out and get that answer and get that confirmation. So it's not always going to be like super lickety split. But then too, like
and
having,
you probably went back and forth a lot.
so much, which is why I loved what you said. You're like, once you know and you get that clarity, walk in confidence, because that's going to help you from flipping your mind again the next day.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it got to a point where it's like, I held a baby. And then I was like, I can't wait to give this baby back.
Yeah.
And I was like, I know.
I
Like,
felt
I
it.
know now.
Yep.
Like, thank you, God. Like, this is what I've been needing.
Yep.
But all along, my husband was like, I think I'm done. Like, I know you need your time and I know you need to feel it. But listen, like, how much time we're going to be able to give the 3 kids that we have now if we have another baby?
Yeah.
And he's so logical. And it's like, he wants to be the good dad. And he wants to be a good leader of the house. And he wants to be the best that he can be. And he's like, I'm spread thin if we have another baby. Like, so, you know,
So
having
good.
people in your life that love you and can be gentle, but can also help you kind of see other perspectives.
That's so good.
That
So
is really good.
Love it.
Well, we haven't touched on the Inspired Conference, so let's do that really quickly before we close. March 25th. No, not March 15th. I'm thinking like I don't even March 25th.
It's
is probably
probably
not
like
even
a
Saturday.
Wednesday.
Yeah, Saturday, March 15th. If you haven't signed up, you can go to the x.church/events and find it there. You're going to want to register and not miss this. We've talked about it on every episode. There are some amazing guest speakers coming. There's going to be amazing worship. We have Rashonda coming back in.
Yeah.
She was at the first couple of Inspired conferences. This place is just going to be packed, and it's going to be a day that you don't want to miss. So if you haven't registered, go ahead and hop on the website and register. Grab another friend
Yeah.
and come.
It's a fun day.
Yeah, I mean, any input. I mean, you guys.
I'm just saying, I've been talking to the guest speakers.
I know.
And you don't want to miss it. Like
There's some very genuine, fun,
so good. So good.
godly, Christ-centered women.
And just like, yeah, you're not going to want to miss it. It's going to be powerful. I think it's going to be powerful in a different way than maybe we've ever seen before. So I'm really excited for that.
Yeah.
I know we say this all the time too, but it's just different when you're just with women.
Yeah.
Just women.
Yeah.
It's a room full of women worshiping together, and it's just different.
It's
and
so
it's like
cool.
a party, but it's also like, but you can also cry.
Yeah.
and you can get a hug from anybody, and we're here for you and we're praying for you. And but then it's also like so fun.
Yeah.
It's just a good time. It's such a good, like, refreshing mark on each year for me.
Yeah.
Something I
So
look forward
good.
to.
So make sure you're making time for that. And then we want to thank you girls for coming. This was such a good conversation and dialogue. If you have any questions or you want any more information or you have any ideas, we're always looking for great ideas for podcasts. But you can email inspired@thex.church. And we're going to be done for today, but we're not done with the season. Come back next week for the next episode.